Go.
So today we're going to talk about the material failures in the Ford Pinto. Now, what was the problem? There were three of them. The first problem was the gas tank. The second problem was the doors. And the third problem was the design procedure.
Be sure to fasten your seatbelt for this little explosive car story. Out of the 11 Pintos crash tested before its release, 8 of them were found to have ruptured fuel tanks in crashes of at least 25 miles per hour. The 3 Pintos without ruptured fuel tanks were spared due to incredibly cheap but extremely efficient structural alterations, like placing a plastic baffle between the tank and the differential housing, keeping the bolts on the housing from puncturing the tank. To clarify, Ford was 8 for 8 when it came to unaltered Pintos rupturing their fuel tanks in any crash above 25 miles an hour. This was concerning to Ford executives, who quickly ordered the structural alterations before its release.
910. That's the number of quality inspections that are made during the assembly of Ford's new Pinto.
Ha, no, not at all. They released the cars anyway. They skipped the $11 per car fix because, well, nobody wanted to displease the boss.
So now we're going to continue on to the failures. So the first failure was that the gas tank would rupture very easily upon impact. The second failure was the door jambs would seal the occupants in the vehicle after a wreck. And then the third problem was the fuel delivery system would leak fumes into the engine compartment, which would cause fires. So next, the design flaws. The Ford Pinto was a subcompact car, meaning it was light and fragile. They positioned the gas tank at the rear of the car, which led to ruptures even in low-speed rear collisions. The tank was also very thin and fragile and was prone to crumpling and puncturing when in crashes of 25 miles per hour or greater.
One of the Ford Pinto's many design flaws allowed gas and fumes to accumulate underneath the car's hood, where an electrical spark would eventually trigger an explosion. Ford claimed that there were no injuries in these explosions, but that was a line of defense that they would not be able to hold on to for very long. Dennis Gioia was the head of Ford's recall division back in 1973, when the first reports of crash-related explosions started rolling in. In 2016, Gioia told Corporate Crime Reporter, "I'm used to getting 25 to 50 reports before I act to recommend a recall of a car. The Pinto file never got more than 5 reports. Regardless, Gioia claims to have expressed a desire to recall the Pinto after seeing the burnt-out remains of a crashed Pinto firsthand. Citing a lack of evidence, the recall office decided not to pursue a recall of Lee Iacocca's pet project.
Now we're going to talk about some of the damages. Ultimately, the design flaws of the Pinto caused at least 27 fatalities and many more injuries in the United States. While the National Highway of Traffic Safety Administration decided that a recall was unnecessary, about 1.5 million cars were inevitably recalled in 1978. Due to the issues caused by the Pinto, Ford was sued for $6 million.
The average amount of time between a new car's initial conception to its final product is about 43 months. But Lee wanted his subcompact sedan in showrooms by the fall of 1970. That left just 25 months to develop and release the Ford Pinto. This is thought to be the fastest turnaround for the development and release of a new car in automotive history. They did it with hard work, ingenuity, and cutting every possible corner. When designing an automobile, the tooling process is the crucial period in which engineers develop, fine-tune, and finalize each one of the approximately 500,000 parts that go into making the car. Once the company knows which parts are needed, they hand their orders over to a tooling company that designs and develops the tools necessary to create the needed parts. Now, usually the tooling company doesn't begin making those parts until each part has been finalized, and the engineers are certain all of the parts will all fit together. But as we will come to see, the production of the Pinto was anything but usual. The tooling process, which typically takes about 18 months, happened simultaneously with the development of the Pinto. That means engineers were figuring out which parts were needed and how to make those parts all at the same time.
So some of the problems and solutions. First, Ford put profit over life, meaning that they were looking to maximize off of their profits over the value of human life. Second is willful negligence, or the ignorance of safety requirements. Now, this issue forced updated automotive safety requirements. Other solutions are moving the gas tank away from the exhaust and increasing the gauge of the sheet metal used.
Shown here is the microstructure for cast iron. Cast iron has very few strong grain boundaries and is very brittle. It is not a good choice for gas tanks due to the fact that it can fracture easily, and especially in the case of the Ford Pinto, where the gas tanks suffered heavy abuse in rear-end collisions. Here we have microstructure for sheet steel. As you can see, sheet steel has many large grain boundaries and very few small grain boundaries. Having the few small grain boundaries allows the steel sheets to have some ductility, but at the same time, the large grain boundaries cause the sheet steel to buckle and tear when it is bent. Stop. Here we have the grain boundaries shown for a aluminum alloy. As you can see, aluminum alloy has many more smaller grain boundaries coupled with the larger grain boundaries, which allow this alloy to have high surface hardness and excellent ductility compared to the steel. The graph here shows different stress strain curves for different sheet metals, including mild steel, which is what the Ford Pinto's gas tank was made out of, magnesium alloy, weak cast iron, pure aluminum, and aluminum alloy. The Ford Pinto's steel tank could have been upgraded to aluminum alloy for slightly more money, but the Ford executives refused to do this due to Lee Iacocca's limit of $2,000 per vehicle. Mild steel is a good selection for gas tanks, but it is not the best. It is better than cast iron because cast iron is brittle. It is better than magnesium alloy because magnesium alloy has a weaker yield strength. And it is much better than pure aluminum because pure aluminum is very weak and has no modular elasticity. Shown here are the different gauges of sheet metals. We have standard sheet steel, regular steel, galvanized sheet steel, stainless steel, and aluminum sheet. Standard gas tanks are made out of 12 to 14 gauge sheet metal. Can either be sheet steel, standard steel, galvanized steel, stainless steel, or aluminum. The Ford Pinto tank was not made out of 12 to 14 gauge steel. It was made out of much thinner gauge steel, 15 gauge and lighter. 15 gauge steel is only 1.79 millimeters thick, which is extremely thin. Any kind of force applied to the tank would cause the tank to tear, and the location of the exhaust right next to the tank often resulted in the ruptured fuel burning. The fuel tank had a capacity of 11 gallons. 11 gallons of gasoline is a lot of fuel, and once it is ignited, it can create a very big fire very quickly. Most of the deaths related to the Ford Pinto were because of the fact that the fuel got hot enough to melt the door jambs and would seal the occupants inside the vehicle, not allowing them to leave.